those who will be watching us later, those of you who are here on live stream or watching us later. Delighted to be with you. We're going to begin our learning today with a bracha for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay.
Rabbi, I would like to share with you guys a good news. We have a new grandson, bar mitzvah last Saturday. His name is Shai Chaim Shulklapel.
Very nice. Mazel tov. Where did the bar mitzvah take place?
The Bris was in, they live in a city. I'm sorry, Bris, we're still working with the young ones.
Oh.
Don't rush it, Leora.
I know. So delighted to share with you.
Who are the parents?
Tali's our older son, and his wife is Sonia.
Nice.
Sonia is using our last name as a reporter for Los Angeles Times. You've probably seen a few of her, whoever reads Los Angeles Times, because she makes it a lot of time on Sunday's front page.
Nice.
So, yeah, she's very
I
good.
don't know why anybody would ever have a career with the LA Times, but that's...
They pay well.
Leora, don't tell them about that. I want them to think I'm poor. I spent most of my career there. I was there for 24 years as a reporter.
Okay. I tell you, they pay well, and she gets 5 months to stay home with a baby with pay. So
wow.
Now I've got to up my donations, Leora, please.
Thank you, Seth. Anyway.
Okay, so well, mazel tov to you.
Thank you.
All right, so I am sharing my screen with all of you. Tell me you can see it. Shake your head yes. Okay, great. All right, continuing as we have been for the last few weeks, we're going to be looking at the text prepared by Rabbi Smokler from the Institute for Jewish Spirituality and continuing our learning with the Sfat Emet. And today we're going to look at just one moment in Jacob's life. This week's Torah portion is primarily about Jacob and Jacob's life. We learned a little bit about him last week when he stole the birthright and the blessing from his older brother Esav, and fearing for his life, Rebekah sends him away. This week in Parshat Vayetze, we find Jacob alone in the middle of the wilderness, and after his encounter with God in the dream and the ladder, he is going to meet Rachel and marry Rachel and Leah and work for a long 20 years. So that's the bulk of this week's Parsha. We're looking at the very beginning. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva vayelech Harana. So he leaves Beersheva and he heads towards Haran. Then the Torah says, Vayifga b'makom, right? He happened upon this place, Vayalen sham, and he goes to sleep there. Kivo hashemesh vayikach, because the sun was setting. Vayikach mivnei hamakom mi'avnei makom vayas. Summit Meroshotav Vayishkav Makom Hahu. So he takes a stone, he places it underneath his head, he lies down and goes to sleep in that place. So I want you to take a look at the Hebrew closely. You can take a look at the English as well. What do you notice that is in the Hebrew? For those of you who are a little bit more nuanced in Hebrew, what do you see? But even in the English, what strikes you? What is interesting about that verse?
It says that place twice, but it does not name that place.
Good. Okay. Very good. So twice and actually 3 times in the verse, the Hebrew word makom is used. Vayifka b'makom, vayikach me'avnei hamakom, and then vayishkav bamakom hahu. So it's interesting that in a very short span of time, in one verse, you have the word makom 3 times. Unusual. And that is going to create the need by our commentators to think about what is this place that he came upon, and why does the Torah emphasize that unless it's there to teach us something about the significance of that place. Very good, Paul. George.
Well, we've also learned that Makom is another name for God.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a tradition. This is important to know for our understanding later. One of the many names in our tradition for God is Makom.
Yeah.
Place, because God is everywhere. There is no place that is not the place of God.
Yeah. And it probably also, I'm looking, it says Mount Moriah, but it is where the temple was, I believe, is the indication.
Okay, so you've jumped ahead a little bit, George.
Wow.
There's nothing in the verse itself that says anything about Mount Moriah.
No, but they keep mentioning Hamakom. Where's this place? There's one, well, maybe he came to God, but also, the most holy place might be where it happened.
Where what happened?
Where he came to, to God, so to speak.
Where who came to God?
Yaakov, Jacob.
Okay, I'm not sure I know what you're getting at. Sorry.
Well, well, first of all, I like to think of it as it's the place, but also if Makom is a synonym we often use for coming to God, to Makom, it might mean not only to that place, but, raising his, holiness or something that went on.
Okay, good. Exactly. Yes. If Makom can be seen as one of the names of God, then it's not so much that Jacob just appears in a place, it's that Jacob encounters the space that is filled with God's presence in this moment. Great. And we're going to see what Rashi does with that, and then later on what the Sfat Emet does with that. I saw a hand. Was it Marilyn? Was it your hand that I saw?
Yeah. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. I would think that that is a marker. And also when you put a stone against a part of your body, you're going to get an impression. And whether, I don't know that it could stay for a long time, but you would feel it. And, he could wake up in the morning and see if he can see on his head that there's a dent in the skin and that would make him remember it.
Nice. So not only is there an emotional connection that Jacob's going to have to this place, but it's very physical as well. Because of all the things that he could have slept on, a stone indeed does leave an impression. And so the impression is not, and we see this again with Jacob later on, don't we? When he encounters God, or the angel, and he wrestles with God, angel, in the next Torah portion, what happens? The Gid HaNasheh, he's injured in his thigh, and that actually stays with him. So there is something significant, I think, to what Marilyn is saying here in terms of the way that we understand Jacob and Jacob's encounters with the divine, that he is forever changed physically and spiritually from these encounters. And if we are like Jacob, Israel, then so too should we in some way be physically and emotionally changed by our encounters with God. So good, excellent. Anybody else have any comments or thoughts about the Torah verse?
Just something very minor. The sham there, I mean, that is the generic word for there. Torah is always so spare and never, the tradition teaches us never uses an unnecessary word. It isn't necessary there. We already say makom, and for some reason we've still got that sham there. I wonder if there's something to read into that. I haven't figured out what to read into that, but that would be more of the emphasizing the ordinariness rather than specialness.
Yeah, excellent. Very nice. Why is that word sham there? Vayifga b'makom vayelan. That's it, right? He came upon a place and he slept. You don't need the there unless it's to emphasize that something significant is happening there in this encounter. And in fact, where is the there is the interesting point that Rashi and the Sfat Emet are going to highlight. So let's take a look. Now let's go to the Rashi. So the Rashi says, and he came upon. So Rashi's commenting on this verb, vayifga, which is an interesting verb, vayifga, because what is pagua in modern Hebrew?
Touch.
Damaged.
Damage, exactly. Like if you're punched, if you're
it.
hit or something like that, it's not a gentle arrival. It's like a whack, a wham, a boom, a bang kind of arrival. He didn't just like happen upon the place. There is something that's very physical about his arriving in this place. That is the implication of vayifga. A pagua, right, can also be in modern Hebrew, like when there is some kind of physical injury to a person, then you use that terminology, you use that verb. So he came upon, Scripture does not mention which place, as Stu said, there. It's not clear, but only mentions the place. I'm sorry, when I transferred from one text to another text, the Hebrew in this came backwards. So that should be bamakom. It refers to the place already mentioned in another passage, in other words, Mount Moriah, of which it is stated back in Genesis, and he saw the place, hamakom, afar off. So this is what George was earlier referring to. In a previous Torah portion, God says to Abraham, when God commands Abraham to take his son Isaac and sacrifice him on the mountain, God says to him, go to the place that I will show you. And he doesn't actually specify what that place is. So the Hebrew there is makom, and the Hebrew here is makom. So what Rashi is doing is a technique that the rabbis always did. And they said if there's a word in one place and the same word in another place in the Torah, perhaps that word appearing in both places teaches us something about this second appearance that we can learn from the first appearance. So in the first appearance, when the place that Abraham landed at was the mountain in which he sacrificed Isaac, or was supposed to sacrifice Isaac, that mountain, according to our tradition, is Mount Moriah. And therefore, Rashi is making an assumption that Jacob, when he gets to the makom, it must be the same makom, the same place that Abraham took Isaac, which is Mount Moriah. Now, why? Why is it that Rashi wants to connect Jacob's moment when he goes to sleep with Abraham's moment of Mount Moriah?
Hi, I made an order.
What do you think? What's the need to bring those two in? Why does Jacob need to now all of a sudden be in the place that Abraham potentially was supposed to sacrifice Isaac? Leora.
Maybe to show him where his father might have been sacrificed and the significant of the holiness of the place.
Very good. Okay, so one possibility Leora is saying is the Torah, Rashi, God, whomever, wants Jacob in this moment to connect to his past, to connect to the experiences of his father and his grandfather, in a moment that you could imagine for his father was one of great trepidation and one of enormous faith. That Isaac, in the moment in which he was being bound on the altar, allowing himself to be bound on the altar, was an expression of unbelievable faith in him towards his father and towards God. And Abraham, in going through the Akedah, it was an expression of Abraham's faith in God. And so maybe, as Leora is suggesting, the Torah Rashi is suggesting that Jacob should have the experience of faith in God the way that Isaac and Abraham had in that encounter. Excellent. Other thoughts as to why Mount Moriah? Does anybody know the significance of, wait, Marilyn, did you just have your hand
Yes.
up?
Maybe it's, well, what Leora said, but continuity, Lador Vador, of the commitment.
Okay, very nice. So when we think of the expression Lador Vador, not only do we think of it in relationship to the past, connecting us to our past, but also the present and the future, Lador Vador. And to that end, let's think about Mount Moriah in a future sense. And I think, George, you had said this a little bit earlier. What do we as Jews in our tradition attribute to what Mount Moriah eventually becomes?
Yeah.
What's that?
The temple?
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I thought I heard it, but I wasn't sure. The temple.
Okay.
The very place that later generations, hundreds of generations later, King David and his son Solomon will build the temple on what was Mount Moriah. And so that's the Lador Vador. The connection to the past, the events that took place when Abraham sacrificed Isaac, is the very place that later on our temple is going to be built. And that is the place that Jacob finds himself in the moment when he goes to sleep. Now again, why? Why does our tradition, why do our sages want Jacob's encounter with God to be in this place? What might that be inviting us to think about?
If I could first ask a question.
Ask away, Stu.
As I recall, after the Akedah at Mount Moriah, Isaac is silent. We never hear from him again. Jacob is anything but silent through action and word, if I'm recalling correctly, after this incident. I need to build towards a theory here, but it just sort of struck me how the two responded so differently to their moment of great intensity at Moriah.
Yeah, very true. Isaac says nothing after his experience with the moment of being bound on the altar. Jacob wakes up from his dream and is unbelievably vocal and engaged in the process. And one wonders how the encounter, it suggests that when we have these kinds of tremendous encounters with God, we're changed. In some instances, in Isaac's instance, we're changed to the point where there are no words that we can say, to offer any kind of explanation, understanding of the experience that we have. The only thing that remains with us is silence. And in others, right, in Jacob's, who didn't experience what Isaac experienced firsthand, right, he's left with the ability to be able to try to articulate the meaning of that experience as he does with the vow that he then shares later on after the dream. Marilyn and then Leora.
I was going to say that it's the connection of the Jewish people to that place, Mount Moriah. You know, you had asked about what would it portend for, you know, it's our connection to that as our holy land, as our, you know, our homeland. And I was thinking of when in 67, when they liberated the temple area, Jerusalem, how the Jews soldiers would have felt at that point. It would be a similar experience.
Very, very nice. Thank you. Very nice. Leora.
It's actually a wonderful remark, because it's putting me not quite at the 67 war, but I was thinking because Jacob probably did not have the complete trust in God like his father and grandfather. And he needed to go through this point of realization that there is God in this place. And he does say that. I can see that there's God in this place.
Very nice. So this has to occur in Mount Moriah in order to establish for Jacob, who doesn't have the same kind of faith that his father and grandfather have, the building of that relationship, because he is going to be the one to carry on the Jewish people. Really nice. Excellent. Okay, let's.
If I could just mention, Marilyn, have you read the book Like Dreamers? It's a fascinating story of the paratroopers who liberated the Temple Mount. And based on your comments.
Yeah.
Yossi
Yossi Klein Halevi is the author, and it is an absolutely very worthwhile, very significant book. It's more than just the experience of what happened on the paratroopers, but what he tries to do in that book is explain where the split in Israel society came from, the split between the secular and the religious Zionists, and why the passion and the love of the land, in particular the larger territories of the land of Israel, what some call Judea and Samaria, what others call the West Bank, what others still call the occupied territories, where the significance of those feelings and the names for that area, why do Israelis have such an emotional connection to it?
What is the name of the book again, please?
Like Dreamers. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I have it, so if somebody wants to borrow it, I'm more than happy to lend it to you.
It's really an exquisitely reported book. It's just he's a wonderful writer to begin with, but I think this was sort of his tour de force, or at least one of them.
It was his tour de force. There's no question about it. He follows up with it as a way of trying to understand the Palestinian dilemma in the book that he wrote called Letters to My Palestinian Neighbors, which is a much shorter read than Like Dreamers. I think Like Dreamers is a book that everybody should read if you have any connection to the land of Israel and the people of Israel, and you want to have an understanding of Israel today. Okay, back to Rashi. So Rashi continues with the same Vayifka b'makom, and he came upon. Similar are other places in the Torah, like in Joshua, where it says Vayifka, that same Hebrew word is used. And therefore, what does it mean? It means our rabbis explained it in the sense of praying. Just as Jeremiah also uses that term, neither make intercession tifka to me. So this word this word right here, vayifga b'makom, which Leora helped us understand in modern Hebrew, reflects a strong encounter like an injury, a punch, a hit, or something like that. According to Rashi, the places that it appears in the Torah, it actually refers to a moment, an encounter of spiritual connection with the divine. When it's used in Joshua chapter 16, in Joshua chapter 19, in Jeremiah chapter 7, in each of those places, it's used in the form of these people kind of creating some prayer to God, an intercession with God. Therefore, that leads Rashi to assume that Vayifga b'makom doesn't just mean Jacob arrived in the place, but actually Jacob prayed in the place. That's what it implies. And from this we learn that Jacob is the one who originated the evening prayer, what we call Ma'ariv, because he prayed in the evening for the first time. There's another midrash, another rabbinic teaching that says that Abraham is the one who brought the custom of morning prayer. Isaac is the one who brought the custom of afternoon prayer. And now Jacob is the one who brings the custom of evening prayer.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
when Rebecca saw Isaac praying in the field, was that in the afternoon?
Yes, exactly. That's the moment that the rabbis use. That's the verse that the rabbis use to associate Isaac with establishing afternoon prayer. The Hebrew word that's used there is lasuach. Lasuach means to have a conversation. So if Isaac was alone, who was he having a conversation with? So the rabbis, the sages say it must have been God, and it must have been the afternoon prayer. Okay, so scripture purposely changed the usual word of praying, not writing v'yit palel, and he prayed, which would have been more appropriate word, but rather vayifga, which means to hit upon the place unexpectedly. To teach you also that the ground jumped before him. The ground jumped before him. So this word vayifga means two things. Number one, it means that he suddenly prayed. It was spontaneous, like he hit upon it. And that the ground jumped before him means that the place, Mount Moriah, jumped to be in the place that Jacob was when he arrived Sham. And this goes back to Stu. Stu, you wanted to understand what the word Sham means. Why is it there? And what Rashi is, and the sages are assuming, is that there is their Mount Moriah, that it picked itself up the mountain, or the earth. The earth contracted, and all of a sudden Jacob finds himself in the very spot that Mount Moriah was, somehow through, this magical movement of the tectonic plates to bring the land together. That's how important it was for the rabbis to see Jacob praying in this place, Mount Moriah, that it happened miraculously and magically. Okay, now Rabbi Smokler offers an explanation for all this, which I think is wonderful, and that leads us into the Sfat Emet. The use of an unexpected word indicates that Jacob found himself in an unexpected place. This ostensibly happened because the place came to him rather than him traveling to the place. An otherwise faraway mountain jumped toward him. As Rashi says later, Mount Moriah uprooted itself and came to Beth El. Beth El was the place that Jacob landed upon in this moment. What a strange, fantastical, enigmatic image. And what a strange, enigmatic response to this man-mountain collision. To compose a new prayer, the evening prayer of Arvit or Ma'ariv. It is the connection between these two claims, between the mode of surprise encounter and the ritual composition that it yields, that perplexes the Sfat Emet. Whatever could be the relationship between prayer and magical moving mountains. So I think Rabbi Smokler really does such a beautiful job of articulating what Rashi is doing in his commentary as a way of framing how now the Sfat Emet is going to respond to this very unusual comment made by Rashi. That number one, Jacob institutes prayer, and number two, that it happens only when Mount Moriah and Jacob come together in this meeting. Now let's look at the Sfat Emet. Are we good? Is everybody with me? Okay, so Sfat Emet says, on the verse, he came upon a certain place and stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. That's our verse. On this verse, Sfat Emet reiterates what we just learned. Rashi says he came upon, indicates that he established the evening prayer. And the verse does not say he prayed lihit palel, to teach us that the ground jumped or shrunk. In other words, Mount Moriah and him collided. It's not clear, according to this opinion, what the relationship is between establishing evening prayer and jumping of the land. So again, Sfat Emet wants to know, why does Rashi make these two comments? What is the connection between Jacob establishing the evening prayer and it having to take place with a Mount Moriah jumping to be present with Jacob in that moment? Well, let's keep going. The will of a person is undoubtedly capable of arousing the holiness of the Blessed One in any place. Thus, when Rashi states that Mount Moriah uprooted itself and came to Jacob, that is because Jacob had a great desire to come to Mount Moriah. Since this place, the place that he was in, Beth El, was very distant from Mount Moriah jumped to it. So let's just pause here. What is the Sfat Emet doing? And I think the key in this paragraph is his very first sentence.
Well, I think it's somewhat obvious that it's so miraculous that Moriah moved to him. He was moved to say a prayer of some sort of prayer for the awe of God.
Well, so that's interesting, Paul. Which happened first? Did Mount Moriah come to him and then he prayed, or did his prayer cause Mount Moriah to come to him?
That's a good question. Maybe it was simultaneous.
See the little asterisk I have? Let's take a minute and let's look. Well, actually, before, does anybody else have any other comment about this first sentence? The will of the person is undoubtedly capable of rousing the holiness of the Blessed One in any place. Yeah, Lisa, and then George.
I think it stresses the partnership between a person and God and how it's mutual. And
excellent. Very, very good. Too often, we hold prayer as this kind of passive encounter with God, where we offer prayers and then expect God to answer them. And that's not, as Lisa's pointing out, is what the nature of prayer should be. Prayer should be a partnership, a dual encounter between the person praying and God who's receiving that prayer. And there's going to be things that both of us are capable of doing in the true act of honest prayer. Very nice. Thank you. George, and then Lauren.
Well, just a comment, then I got a statement here. They have a pretty lively imagination, but if you get to the next line, and it kind of connects here, and I'll just read the English. And he dreamt, and behold, a ladder was sent earthward, and its top reached heavenward. And behold, the angels of God's were ascending and then descending. You would think they'd be coming down and then going up, but here they're going up and then coming down. So,
Therefore, teaching us what, George?
I'm not exactly sure. I guess he's praying for something, but the holiness is going up and then coming down. I mean, it's not just coming down.
Okay, so in other words, what I think I'm hearing you say is
Not
it relates to Lisa's comment.
Yeah.
That we, the person who is praying, have the ability to influence God's actions and the world around us.
Yeah.
So maybe, Paul, that answers the question that I asked earlier. It was his prayer that caused the mountain to come to him, not the other way around. Lauren, and then Marilyn.
Well, it reminds, what came to mind is, do you have to be at a cemetery to feel the presence of the person who has died? Or can you feel that presence here in my house? So, my parents are at Mount Sinai in Hollywood. I really don't go there, but I feel their presence so much. So that's what it reminded me. They come to me. I don't go to them. And that's what it kind of reminded me of. I mean, they're all around.
So the way Lauren's reading this is she's not buying the mountain actually moved to Jacob, but rather Jacob, through his hearing the story that his father and grandfather probably told him about the Akedah, in the moment in which he so needs to feel God's presence, he feels Mount Moriah coming to him. He feels the experience that his grandfather and father had in that place and is absorbing it himself without necessarily having to be at the actual place. Nice. Very nice. Marilyn.
Isn't there a saying that says faith can move mountains?
Here we go. Exactly. Right? Back to the comment that Lisa alluded to. Yes, that our sincere prayer really is a partnership, that we can actually change the nature of the world in which we live. Very much so.
There's also a saying that if the mountain, if Mohammed can come to the mountain, the mountain.
Right.
That's right. So now let's take a minute and jump to the asterisk and look at what Rabbi Smokler says here. Detached from his place of origin, right? Because Jacob is all alone. He's left his family. He's feeling probably a great, deal of existential angst. Who am I? Where am I? What am I? How am I? What is the future? Do I have a connection to my past? He's probably experiencing all of that. He's detached from his place of origin, perhaps lonely or scared or rootless. And Jacob was full of longing for hamakom, for God, and for a place where God was manifest, right? As Lauren said, to his father and grandfather, which was Mount Moriah. Jacob grew up being weaned on the stories of the encounter at Mount Moriah. So that's what he's longing for. The Rebbe suggests that through the intensity of his yearning for contact with the divine and through the power of his will to ignite that relationship, Jacob was able to do just that. Lisa, you must have read ahead. He summoned God. He summoned God. He brought the far near. Now, by the way, that also could be Lauren's interpretation. To bring the far near doesn't necessarily have to mean physically he brings the far near, but he makes the far intimate, right? Imminent within his experience in the moment. He summoned God. He brought the far near. He rendered the intangible tangible. Figuratively and maybe literally, he moved mountains. All through the strength of his ratzon, his will, his human initiative, his will. Through acts of imagination, contemplation, and sheer will, efforts for the sake of truth, one can illuminate darkness and call the infinite close. So we're going to hold on to that last comment as we go back into the rest of the Sfat Emet's text. But do we understand what Rabbi Smokler is saying here? What is she saying, not about Jacob's experience in this moment, but about our own experience with prayer? What is she suggesting might be our own encounter with God, our own experience of prayer? I'll go back to it. How might prayer work for us? How should prayer work for us? Why do we use the Siddur of all things? Why do we read the words of those who came before us? And how is that similar? How is our praying with the Siddur or studying and reading Torah on a regular basis similar to Jacob's ability to move mountains, to literally bring God closer to him? Yeah, Lisa.
To spark our motivation and just hopefully grab onto something to get us actually in action.
Okay, so sometimes we don't have the language in our own prayers, as Lisa's saying, to be able to move mountains. And therefore, the words of our ancestors, just like the story of Mount Moriah for Jacob, was enough to be able to change him, to create a serious encounter with God. And maybe what we need is the Siddur to do the same thing for us, to actually move mountains. Other thoughts? Okay, well, let's go back to the rest of the Sfat Emet. He's arguing, right? This is the very essence of evening prayer. What is the very essence of evening prayer? Right here. The will of a person is undoubtedly capable of arousing the holiness of the Blessed One in any place. This is the very essence of evening prayer. For certainly, at a time of darkness, there is no space for revelation of light except through the human will. Ah, wow, that is a wonderful sentence. Let's unpack that sentence. At a time of darkness, there is no space for revelation of light except through the human will. Darkness, I think, there's two types of darkness that Jacob is encountering in the moment of his prayer. What are the two types of darkness Jacob is encountering? Yeah, Leora?
One is probably the darkness, and one is where am I? I'm not sure where I am.
Excellent. Excellent. So the two types of darkness is the physical reality in which he is living. The darkness of the night has fallen him, and we all know how scary the night can be, especially when we're alone in the middle of nowhere with no nightlight to shine a light. And then, as Leora said, there's the emotional darkness of the place, of his being, that existential crisis of his leaving his family and not knowing what the future will behold. And it is in that place of darkness, physical and spiritual and emotional darkness, that Jacob prays, that Jacob seeks the light, the revelation of the light. He seeks God's presence in a place of darkness. Right? Obviously, this is a lesson that the Sfat Emet is teaching to all of us. Every one of us has encounters with darkness, physically, spiritually, emotionally. How do we get out of that dark place? How do we find the light? One option is we just wait for somebody to turn on the light. And we hope and pray that somebody will turn on the light and we will experience that light. But that's not this solution. This solution is, if we want light in darkness, we have to turn on the light. We have to be the ones to reach out to God. That's what the Sfat Emet is suggesting here. We can, through our sheer will, bring God to us. We can reveal God's hiddenness in the greatest moments of God's hiddenness through our prayer practice. The arousal of illumination does not come about through the normal processes of the world. The world does not work that way. Rather, everything depends upon human will. It's not so easy sometimes just to turn on a light to expel that darkness. Sometimes we have to go deeper. That's what the Sfat Emet is saying. Marilyn.
Human will, I mean, humans have free will. So, I mean, you really have to be inspired to, I don't know if the word is inspired, but to seek God. Otherwise, I mean, with another part of human will would be just to let somebody else turn the light on, because we have free will. We can do what we want. And so it's a higher calling, I guess, to really seek God with your human will.
That's right. When you were just talking, Marilyn, the image that just came to mind is a parent teaching a child to walk.
Mm.
When a parent teaches a child to walk, and that toddler is moving forward and stumbling, what is a parent doing as the toddler is moving towards you? What's the parent doing?
Cheering and cooing and encouraging.
Encouraging, but
and
if the child is about to fall, does the parent jump in and grab the child? Not necessarily, right? The parent allows the child to fall. And then what happens? The child picks herself up and takes another step. And what does the parent do? The parent goes backwards. As the child steps forward, the parent steps back. What is it that we are teaching our children in that encounter? Right? Their will is strong. They want to walk. We know they can walk, and we're going to allow them to walk. If every time we saw them, beginning to topple over, and we jumped in to grab them, we would actually be doing a disservice to our children. If we said to them, we only want you to walk when we know that you're sturdy on your legs, they will never get sturdy on their legs.
Same with birds. I don't know if it's all birds, but I know I've learned that the mother bird will push the little one out so that it has to flap, and then it learns to fly.
If you take a butterfly and open up the egg, the cocoon, before the butterfly works to get out on its own, the butterfly will not be able to fly. The butterfly has to struggle through, right? The baby bird has to struggle through breaking the egg in order to fully be able to extend her wings. We have to reach in the moment of darkness and find within ourselves the ability to connect. Now, we don't have to do it without going back to the stories of our tradition, the Mount Moriahs of the past, the encounters of Abraham and Isaac and all of those. We can use that. Those are the tools that we have in our fingertips to help us illuminate God's light. But we have to be the ones to do it. It can't be somebody else doing it for us. That, I think, is the power of this Sfat Emet, the power of his message. It is written in Isaiah, it shall be well with the near and the far. This means, whoops, that one does not belong. I'm not quite sure what that one is there for. This means that nothing bad comes from the blessed ineffable one. Therefore, the far is also for good. For on account of distance, true will is awakened within a person. Right? You know what this means. The bad that happens to us in order to teach us something. The distance that we feel is there to remind us of what we love and what's missing in our lives. With this will, one can awaken, even in a distant place, illuminations of the Blessed One. This is what Rashi meant when he said, to teach us that the land jumped. For this is a teaching for every Jew to know that with true effort, there is no place that one cannot feel illuminations of imminence. You want to experience God, you're going to have to do the work. You're going to have to struggle in the darkness in order to be able to feel and see the light. Somebody can't give it to you. Right? You got to work hard to be able to grow in the way that you want to be able to grow. Right? That's what Sfat Emet is teaching us. Isn't this a marvelous teaching? So, takes us to the questions. Consider the possibility of bringing light to darkness. Darkness outside of yourself or within. When, if ever, have you experienced that transformation? What, if anything, happened? What, if any, practices gave or continue to give, to give you that power? And have you ever felt like you've moved mountains? What gave you the strength to do that? So what do you think? When have you experienced that transformation? Those first steps like a toddler learning to walk? When have you moved mountains? And what gave you the strength to do so? Yeah, Rachel.
Thanks, Rabbi. I think I'll just briefly say the idea of light to darkness for me, just the idea of like awareness, literally illumination in something. So, I mean, I have a lot of examples of that, but I guess one that I could share, for example, is just in what I thought I understood about maybe gosh, I don't even know how to summarize it. What I thought I understood about things I believed in a spiritual sense. And as I learned more history, it kind of then allowed me to make different life decisions that I would say had me pivot in ways that for me were mountains moved and things that was blocked in now were removed. So yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Others want to share? Well, these are questions to contemplate. The fourth question, I think, was alluded to in Lauren's comment earlier. What could it mean for a faraway place to jump to you? Have you ever experienced yourself to be in a place that you are not physically in? right? I can think of all sorts of moments when we've, experienced something and then held on to that experience at a later date when we're not present to that place anymore or that experience. Just as, I spoke last Friday night in shul about a song that can reawaken a certain or evoke a certain memory or a smell, a scent that, reminds you of somebody else or an encounter that you had somewhere else. That the power of memory to evoke these things and to shape and to change the nature of who we are in these moments can be quite powerful and very, very illuminating. So,
Can I actually add what you just reminded me that I heard you say, yeah, from Kabbalat Shabbat. Yeah, I think that's amazing too. And I just recently was looking at, or I guess listening to I was researching stuff about shows from like the 80s, and it was interesting to read the comments under the YouTube of so many people saying similar things about, oh, I remember that show, because then it evoked the memory of watching it together, with family, etc. And it was just sweet and warm to read these. And I myself, having my own, and someone commented, I was like, I really like this. So if I ever write a book about this, I'm going to give them credit and say this, but it's having music is almost like the closest thing to a time machine, because it is amazing how what you just said is a truth, that we kind of really can get back to a time with hearing notes or the song itself. It's fascinating.
well, and that's why I think prayer is sung, because it should do the same thing.
Amen.
George.
Yeah, again, using the word Rosh for his head. And then the next line, and I'm just going to quote, just three of the Hebrew words, the Rosho Magia Hashemaima, and its top, meaning the ladder, reached heavenward. So it's using the same word, reaching heaven. Could it be his head thinking that way, ascending, higher?
Yeah, nice.
Same words used in the next line.
Very nice, George. All right, everybody. Well, there you have the Sfat Emet of the day. Hopefully a little bit of guidance and wisdom for all of us as we continue to move in our journey of life. Sometimes darkness, sometimes light, but the ability each of us has to be able to bring about a sense of our own spiritual being, even in the face of dark moments. Have a good rest of the week, everybody. And God willing, we will be together again next week.
Shabbat shalom.